So let's see what infographics has to say about what life was like for a Roman slave during the Roman Empire. Because he was there, probably. I don't know. I have no idea how old this person is. But this is their YouTube channel. This is infographics. I've reacted to him a hell of a lot before. I agree with him on a lot of things. I disagree with him on other things. But I think, honestly, he tries his best to stay in the center. And then, you know. So we'll see. The horrible life of an American... fucking Jesus Christ. The horrible life of an average Roman Empire slave. Let's go.
This video was made possible by Wix. If you're ready to create a website, head on over to wix.com/go. Slaves done as some wicked slave driver stood behind them with a whip in his hand. Many of the slaves were domestic servants. Some were skilled artisans. Others were even said to be highly educated.
Also, listen, I just want to point this out. They have these blonde ones up here always in these things because they're like supposed to be more beautiful, but I like brunettes. I'm just saying.
Physicians. The ones who did generally have a very hard life were those that were doing their time as property of a Roman as punishment. Life for these people was brutal and often very short. For that reason, there were sometimes slave revolts, with the one you all probably know about led by the slave Spartacus. This former gladiator and military leader took part in what are now called the Servile Wars. But what about the average Joe slaves?
I mean, Spartacus was kind of shafted, I'm just saying.
So, as Roman slaves lived such diverse lives, let's start with the great Spartacus. The Greek writer Plutarch tells us that Spartacus was a...
Spartacus is a great example of how anybody, no matter where they come from, could become a slave. It doesn't matter what your background is at all.
Thracian by birth, who had once served as a soldier with the Romans, but had since been a prisoner and sold for a gladiator.
Yeah.
If he indeed was Thracian, then that would mean he came from what we now call Bulgaria, or possibly Greece or Turkey. While sources differ, it's said that Spartacus was first captured by Roman legions and then trained in gladiatorial school. If you've seen our show on what sometimes went down in the Roman Colosseum, you'll know that gladiators didn't exactly have an easy life. What do we know about the schools? Well, these prisoners of war were kept often two to a cell. They were
Maximus is another good example, right? Because he was a Roman general before becoming a slave.
in fact in prison, but each day
general of their armies to slave in a day.
they would train outside of their cells in an arena. Gladiators had different kinds of skills and training methods, and Thracian gladiators practiced in the art of swordsmanship. National Geographic tells us that the slaves were not allowed out of the fortress unless being taken to the Colosseum or another arena. But while the cells were not exactly a great place to live, it's said that there were heated floors for winter, baths, and an infirmary. And the slaves lived in
heated floors? Jeez.
confines that were equipped with plumbing. Historians say these gladiators were highly valued slaves, and so they were kept in good condition so they could fight well. These slaves, we're told, usually would not die or even be treated too badly in their prison. They occupied a 32 square foot cell, which, as we said, was probably shared with one more person. They trained day in and day out all year round, and trained not as a team but as individuals. When the time came, they were often taken out of the training school and sent to fight in an arena somewhere. So the life of a gladiator slave, probably a much better existence than hard labor, but obviously they could find themselves in a very bad place being pitted against a starving lion. That's likely one of the reasons why Spartacus decided to plot against the Romans and head for the hills. It's believed he was captured and killed, with many of his followers also dying by way of crucifixion. But perhaps a fate worse than being trained to fight in an arena was hard labor. After all, someone had to build those great cities in the ancient empire, mine the precious metals.
The Roman aqueducts, I believe you can put 4 chariots side by side across the bottom of it, right? They're fucking huge. They according to some books that I've read, the aqueducts in ancient Rome rivaled the largest of aqueducts in like Colorado and Utah, right? It was wild, the engineering back then. They had the Roman irrigation system was crazy sophisticated for the time period.
Metals and plow the fields. We're told,
and a lot of the Roman streets are all still perfectly intact underneath the streets in Rome currently.
Quite often, these people would literally be worked to death. When these people were captured, often by Roman soldiers, they were often taken to the market where they were sold. Anyone could buy himself or herself a slave, and it's said some more wealthy people might own as many as 400 slaves. Perhaps the worst kind of work was in the Roman mines, although historians also...
Nah, one dude had 500 slaves just for buying and, like, rebuilding properties.
Also say that slave farmers had a very hard job. Women slaves with less muscle might work in the house as servants, but they might also be given the job of dressmaking or even hairdresser. Many other women were sent to work in small factories where they would make handcrafts and jewelry. The young boys, it's said, were expensive, as it's not likely many Romans wanted old men in their employ. We say employ, but they weren't paid anything. They had to do exactly as they were told, and any kind of backchat could lead to a serious beating. If a slave killed his own master, that would usually end in all the slaves of the household being killed. One might have a nice master, but the opposite was of course possible. As we said before, some slaves gained a certain amount of respect as they were educated. These slaves would often be appointed to the work of teacher for the young Romans. As one writer tells us, how a slave was treated depended on the owner. If a slave was favored by his owner, there was always a chance that this slave could earn his freedom, perhaps the best thing that could happen to a Roman slave. On the other hand, get an awful owner and there was every chance you could be beaten, flogged, branded, maimed, or killed.
I mean, it's like saying you can have a good supervisor or a bad supervisor at your job, right? Like, I don't know about you guys, I've had a lot more bad supervisors than good ones, but the good ones are there. The good ones are there.
One historian writes about the slaves of Pompeii, stating that the average household in the city would have around 7 slaves. He wrote that the work of slaves could be tough, but they were often free to roam about the streets, grab a bit of rest down at the fountain, or just disappear in the crowd. The richer Romans didn't usually walk through the crowded streets, as that would be beneath them. Instead, when they went out, they were carried by slaves on what's called a litter. They are those boxes on sticks you may have seen in the movies. What's surprising?
Right, I'm just gonna check real quick to make sure that we're still up and running on Kick.
Charlie Kirk. LOL.
Okay, we are. Alright, we're good. I just wanted to make sure. Alright, back to business.
Surprising though, according to this historian anyway, is that the slaves were not always identifiable by the clothes they wore. They often wore tunics.
See, I'm not as new as I used to be, but I'm still learning things.
Just like anyone else.
I got most of it down.
Apparently, not so many slave owners would wear togas, as they were too cumbersome and not always easy to clean. As for cleaning, we're told that clothes would often be washed partly with urine. The reason was that it contained lots of ammonia. One of the jobs of a slave, of course, was washing these clothes, so part of their day would be standing in baths of urine. This was likely not the most pleasant job in the world, but laundry detergent was a long way from being invented. As these slaves were property, if they were damaged in some way, say hit by someone's donkey on their way to cleaning duty,
I believe they would also tan stuff, like they would tan leather and like hide and shit with urine. That's where the term they're so broke they don't have a pot to piss in, because people would literally piss in pots and then sell that to the local like tanner, because that's what they would use.
The owner of that donkey would have to pay for the treatment of the slave, or at least pay some money to the slave's owner. Here, we must remember that around 1 out of 5 people across the Roman Empire were slaves at one point, and there was no great feeling of injustice, at least to the Romans. Having slaves was as normal as having people that work for low wages in current-day factories or coffee shops. For the rulers of Rome, the inequality was just part of life. We might also remember that those great Greek philosophers who, for the most part, were noble and extremely clever, said that a perfect society had to have slaves. That's just how it was, and it's likely that Plato or Aristotle just couldn't see it any differently. Remember, in the Roman Empire, the slaves were often the losers of a battle, or at least the surviving citizens of a losing army. The Romans just saw it as their right to take them, but slaves often came by way.
But also, after you conquer let's call it an empire. After you conquer an empire, what are you going to do with all the civilians? Are you just going to kill them all? You obviously you wouldn't want to, but you can't just bring them all in and then expect them to like assimilate to your society. They fucking hate you now. You killed their parents. What? You got to do something.
Way of piracy.
And putting them as slaves is obviously not a good thing, but allowing them the ability to buy their freedom is good, because it teaches them not only to respect the civilization that they're in now, but to conform to its rules, which ultimately is what you would need to do for a successful integration of foreigners to your country.
Or just plain stealing. Gangs of people would go into a town and just take people there, then deliver them by boats or over land to the markets where the Romans would buy them. If those slaves had children with a Roman, those children would also be slaves. One historian tells us that slaves were not allowed to have their own slave families. Life was work, and that was it. The more slaves a Roman had was part of his status. And if you had very special slaves being able to do special things, then that also added to your status. When in public, Roman would often come out with their slaves, showing them off to other Romans. These days, people use things like cars, clothes, bling to do the same thing. And that's what we have to remember, that slaves were seen as mere things, albeit things that could talk. But again, some slaves, the very special ones, did teach things such as philosophy, so we would imagine those slaves had a higher value than someone who spent all day down in a mine digging for gold.
Higher skilled trades do still today have a higher value than like menial labor task, right?
Very much doubt that they spent all day chained, like some of the slaves that were found after Mount Vesuvius erupted in Pompeii. Researchers also said that some of those slaves had been working so much that their bodies were all out of shape. As we said, the best thing that could happen to you is that you could win your freedom, and this did happen. Some Romans used it to make slaves work harder, telling them obedience could pay off. Some historians also tell us that in spite of the occasional slave revolts, it was in the interest of slave owners to treat their slaves well, and so many did. A well-fed slave worked harder and was happier, and would likely not dream all.
Again, terrible that they were property, but most times people take care of their property, so hopefully their normal everyday life wasn't so bad.
Day about sinking a knife into his or her owner. We'll leave you with the words of one writer. No doubt some slave owners were more generous than others, and there was, in a few cases, the possibility of earning one's freedom, but the harsh day-to-day reality of the vast majority of Roman slaves was certainly an unenviable one. No doubt one of the worst jobs a Roman slave could have today would be designing websites from scratch.
We're not talking about Wix, I don't care. So yeah, that's average, the life of an average Roman Empire slave. Much the same as the rest of them. Honestly, a lot of them are relatively similar. If I'm just being honest, a lot of the ancient slaveries are all pretty similar. Anybody could find themselves becoming a slave because every person could be property of any other person at any given time. The highest of generals could find himself a slave to the baker, right? The richest of business owners could find himself a slave to a teacher. Teachers could find themselves a slave to the blacksmith, stuff like that. And it all really just depended, and there were many ways that you could find yourself a slave. Now, I'm not saying that that is at all the same as what happened with American slavery, but I am saying that it is proof that slavery was a human sin. It was a bad thing that humans as a whole did to other humans, and it does not have to be a class or race war of any kind, right? I don't know why people try to make it that way. Well, I know why people try to make it that way, but they need to understand that it is not at all that, okay? There have been just as many, if not probably more, white slaves in history than there were ever black slaves in history. Definitely like this video. Definitely follow me on Kick. Definitely put in the chat, put in comment sections, let me know. If you were a gladiator in the Roman Colosseum, what would your fighting style be? And you can only use the weapons that were available in the time. You can't I'm going to show up with a gun and kill everybody. No. That's not how it works. You have to do it. Anyway, follow me on Kick. Follow me on X at real_Sestill. Follow me on or subscribe to me on YouTube at youtube.com/Sestill_G2D because I am the second coming. You can also look for me on Rumble if you're tired of YouTube. At rumble.com/Sestill. I am everywhere that videos are made, and I look forward to hearing from you guys. All right, I'll see you next week. Bye.